We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 23a. The Gemara is in the middle of bringing a brisa that supports Rabbi Yochanan's position that Isho Misham Chetzi, when a person sends out his fire and it does damage, it's like his arrows. And the brisa says that the Torah begins Benizke Mimono. It begins talking about Eish by talking about it as if it's damage from his property. Vesayim Benizke Gufa, but then the pasuk ends and describes it as if it's damage that's coming from him, from the person himself. Lomar Lach, and that's to tell you, Isho Misham Chetzio, that his fire is considered like his arrow, and that brisa is explicitly like Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi explains, Benizke Mimono, the pasuk begins talking about Nizke Mimono, Dichsiv Ki Seitze Eish. It says that the fire goes out. Demashma Meyatzma, it sounds like it's going out on its own. It's not from the person. But then the pasuk says, Benizke Gufo, the pasuk phrases it as if it's damage that he himself is causing, to Kari Le Mavir, because it calls him the Mavir, the person who created the fire. And again, that's to tell you, the brisa says, Isho Misham Chetzio, which supports the position of Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Kasha Leili Abaya. Abaya had the following question. Lemando Amar Isho Misham Chetzio. According to the one who says that by Eish, the obligation is because it's like the person's arrows, Tamun be'eish de poter rachmona hechi mashkachasla. How is it possible that the Torah says poter by a situation of items which are concealed that are damaged by the fire? That does not make any sense if you say Isho Misham Chetzio. Rashi explains, Hechi mashkachasla. The question is as follows. Ilu adam zorik chetz. Let's say a person would throw an arrow. Vehizik b'taman, and damage something that was concealed. Lo mechayev b'nezik, would he not be chayev in damages? Hakaymalan b'hai pirkin. Petzatachas potza l'chayev es hashogei kemezid vonis karotzen. We say in the parak that a person is chayev for any kind of damage, whether it's by mistake or on purpose, whether it's by accident or whether it's willingly. And so the same thing would be true if a person damages something that is tamun, and if isho is mishum chetzio, the same thing should be true by eish. Rashi continues, Lishna Achrin, another version, another explanation of what the Gemara is asking. When it comes to an arrow, it's always doing damage. It's piercing something. It's always doing damage to something that is concealed. Umazik, and it creates a damage. Velo shamati, but Rashi says, I did not hear that explanation, but that's another possible explanation. But in any case, the question of the Gemara is, if you hold Isho Misham Chetzio, why is Eish Potter when it's a situation of Tamun? And the Gemara continues, V'nichale, Rava says that Abaya found an answer to this question. It was good to him with the following answer. The case could be as follows. Let's say a fire started in a particular courtyard, and then the fence, which would have stopped the fire from spreading, the fence falls down, nothing to do with the fire itself. And the fire goes ahead and it goes out and damages in another courtyard, because there you have a situation where even though in general, Isho is Misham Chetzio, but there it would be considered like his arrows are finished. Meaning to say, that fire was protected, it was enclosed, it wasn't going anywhere, and then something happened that was out of his control, and now the fire was able to go into the next courtyard. So there, everybody agrees Isho is not Misham Chetzio, and so in that situation, we would say that it's possible that you are potter by tamun in a situation of concealed. But the Gemara says, one second, if so, if the case over here is kalu lechetzio, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's just isho misham chetzio, lenyin goloi nami kalu lechetzio. So in terms of things that are not concealed as well, his arrows have been finished, so to speak, and there should be no obligation to pay for any of the damage, whether it's tamun or whether it's goloi. Why do we make such a distinction? And so the Gemara says, Ella, rather you have to say as follows. Laman de islay misham chetzio, the one who holds isho misham chetzio, islay nami misham mamona, would also agree that there's an obligation because the eish is considered his mammon. And so therefore, there would be an obligation on things that are not concealed. The patur would only be for things that are concealed. Ukagon shahayo lo lagodra velo godra, the case would be that he should have really put up the fence, and he did not. Dehasam shorahu, because there it's basically the same as his ox. Velo tapach beape, he didn't close off the fence before him. He wasn't able to protect his ox, or in this case the fire properly, and that's why he's going to be obligated again by things that are not tamun, by things that are begoloi in the open, but things that are tamun, there's going to be the regular patur of eish by tamun. And the Gemara continues, but if it's true that the person who holds of chetzio also holds of mamono, my beinayu, so what's the difference between the two opinions? They both agree isho misham mamono, the other one is just adding isho misham chetzio. What does that add? And the Gemara says, ika beinayu, the difference between them is l'chayivo bi'arba devarim, that if you hold isho misham chetzio, then there's a chiyav to pay arba devarim, meaning not only nezek, but you have to also pay the tsar, ripoy, shevis, and boshas. Actually, Rashi will discuss the boshas in a moment, but you have to pay those extra payments because it is like a damage that's coming from the person himself, where you have to pay arba devarim. And Rashi explains, V'nichale, it was good to Abayu, Meshani lahachi, meaning to say that Abayu gave the following answer, V'nof legeder, that the case is that the fence falls down, Shel chotzer, of the courtyard, Shalom machmas delek, it falls down not because of the fire, Di machmas delek chetzvim, because if it would fall down because of the fire, that would still be his arrows, the kalu lo chetzio, his arrows really have finished, Shebeshosh hidlek ha'esh, the hainu zrikas chetz, at the time that he lit the fire, which is the same as the throwing of the arrow, lo hayaroi lahazik, it wasn't going to damage, b'chotzer acheres, in that other chotzer. And so then the Gemara said, Islay nami mishum mamona, the one who says isho mishum chetzio agrees with the concept of mamono. Vehecha deleka l'chiyuve mishum chetzio. If you're not able to obligate the person because of chetzio, ve'ika l'chiyuve mishum mamona, but there is an obligation as due to the fact that it's his mammon, mechayvin alei, he would be chayiv hilkach linyan goloi. Therefore, for example, if it's something that's not concealed, afagav dekalu lo chetzio, even though the arrows have been finished, chayiv mishum mamona, there would be a chayiv because it's his property that's doing damage. Ukagon shahayalo lagodra beterem tavor hadleika sham, meaning this was a situation where he could have really fenced it in before the fire left. Hayalo shows v'yachal lagodra, he had enough time to stop the fire, he didn't. V'lo godra, he didn't do that. The afagav deleka l'chiyuve have a rishon mischayev al shem sofu, even though he's not chayev for the original lighting of the fire, because again it's kol lechetzio. But then the fact that at the end he didn't protect it, he didn't put in the fence, shaloshim or gachalto, he didn't protect his coal, ligdor befanat, to put the fence, that creates an obligation. But again, that obligation is not mishum chetzio, that obligation is mishum mamono. Shoruhu v'lo tafach bi'apei, it's the same as having a shore, of having an ox and not closing the door before it. Hareza kakones shoro ladir, it's like putting an ox into a pen, v'lo nal b'fana, but not closing the door. V'yatzav hizik, and it goes out and damages. That's the same thing over here again. Over here I have a situation of kalu lechetzio, but then the situation was that the fence fell down and he could have put it up, so he was really obligated to stop the fire from going. That's the same as not closing the fence before his shore, and therefore he's chayev mishum mamono. The Gemara then said, but if it's true that the one who says chetzio agrees with mamono, so what's the difference between them? Now Rashi over here says, Rashi understands this to mean in a situation where he owns the coal, because again, as we said earlier, if you hold isho mishum mamono, then you have to be the owner of the fire, whereas by isho mishum chetzio that might not be the case. So the Gemara is really asking, according to Rashi, in a situation where you own the fire, what is the difference whether you're chai because of mamono or whether you're chai because of mamono or chetzio? Rashi understands they're certainly arguing in a situation. You can't just say the difference is where he doesn't own the coal, because they're certainly arguing in a situation where he owns the coal as well. Because we said earlier that according to Rabbi Yochanan, isho, his fire is mishum chetzio. Alma be isho nami pligi. You see that they're arguing by his fire when he owns it, where he owns the coal. And Rashi says, I understand until now we thought that it was just chetzio and not mamono. Like we said, that when it comes to property that has substance, this doesn't. So then you can have a distinction between the two opinions. Let's say it is his mammon, but it's not his arrows anymore. Like where the fence falls down. That in such a situation, again, the chetzio, his arrows have already finished because there was a fence and then it fell down. That then we would say, according to the one who just says arrows potter, but now that both of them are saying chayiv because they agree mamono, what is the difference between chetzio and mamono? And so the Gemara answered, the difference between them is whether he's chayiv and daled devarim. Let's say you have a situation, according to the one who says mishum chetzio, let's say you have a situation where the fire burned the hand of a person. Chayiv barba devarim, going to be chayiv in four things: nezek, v'tzar, ripoy, v'sheves. Again, the way Rashi understands, usually daled devarim means besides nezek, tzar, ripoy, sheves, and boshes. It means the four things besides nezek. But here Rashi actually says it means nezek, tzar, ripoy, and sheves. Avol beboshes lo. Rashi says when it comes to the fire, you're not going to be chayiv with boshes. Damrin and v'shili pirkin eino chayiv ala boshes ad sheyim eskavin. Because when it comes to boshes, you're only chayiv to pay for humiliation if the person who did the damage had kavana to do the damage. Avol daled devarim chayiv, but the other four things you are chayiv. Tepshiyahi, this is negligence. He should have realized that the wind was going to carry it, then carry the fire. We have a case like that also later on. Let's say you have a situation where he falls off the roof and it's a common wind that blows him off the roof. You're chayiv in four things, but not boshes. And again, according to the one who says mishumamono, there is no daled devarim because it's considered like a shore that does damage where there's no daled devarim. That's only true if you say Isho Mishum Chetzio. And Rashi continues, Vua dinami dika beinayu kol hani delael. The truth is that there are more differences between Isho Mishum Chetzio, Mishum Mono, the cases we had earlier. Kelev v'gamol, like the case of the dog and the camel. Delamad damar Mishum Chetzio chayiv dehamim mono, because according to the one who says that it's Mishum Chetzio and it's the arrows, so that's considered to be his property in that case. Afagav delav Chetzio, even though it's not considered to be his arrows. V'Chetzio afagav delav mono, and you're chayiv for Chetzio, even though it's not mono. Islay. So then, according to that, the Mandar Mishum Chetzio, in other words, according to the one who says Isho Mishum Chetzio, he's essentially saying that there are two ways to obligate an Eish in all situations. It can be Chaya Mishum Chetzio, even though it's not his mammon. It can be Chaya Mishum Mamono, even though it's not Chetzio. So in those cases where the Kelev and the Gamal, they cause the fire, there's going to be an obligation. But according to the one who says that the only obligation is of Eish is Mamono and not Chetzio, so Potter, so in that case, if let's say the dog or the camel are causing a fire to spread, you're going to be Potter, unless it literally takes the fire, puts it right up, so it's not a situation of the spreading of the fire. Again, what we said was that in those cases of the Kelev and the Gamal, so if you say that it's Chetzio, so then it's the arrows of the Kelev, it's the arrows of the Gamal, and we're going to say Chayiv in that case. But if you're going to say Isho Mishum Mamon when it's not really his fire, so it doesn't matter that it's the arrows of the dog, it doesn't matter that it's the arrows of the camel, and the only way that there's going to be a Chayiv is if the Kelev or the Gamal apply the fire directly to the thing that's damaged, not that it spreads in the normal way that fire spread. So therefore, you do see there are other distinctions between Isho Mishum Chetzio, Isho Mishum Mamono, because again, Mishum Chetzio, basically, it doesn't have to be his own fire. Now, the only reason we say this one distinction of Dal Devarim, Mishum Da'afilu Hecha Da'agacheles Shalo, Mashmalo Diyesh Chelik B'Devarim, because again, we're trying to find the difference between the two opinions where he does own the coal. Now, where he owns the coal, certainly it's going to be Isho Mishum Mamono, so what's the nafkamina Isho Mishum Chetzio, Isho Mishum Mamono in that case? And the answer is Dal Devarim. Also, that's a more common kind of case where he owns the coal, and that's why we're trying to find that distinction over here. Rashi says, I heard this from my Rebbe, but the first opinion, that seems to me to be correct. Now, the Achronim point out that we don't have the Lashon Rishon of Rashi. However, we should note that on Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, Rashi does say that right now we think the difference between Isho Mishum Chetzio and Isho Mishum Mamono is that by Chetzio, you don't have to actually own the fire, but by Mamono, you have to actually own the fire. And Rashi phrased it as if right now we think that, but Rashi never backs off of that. And the Achorim say it could be that the other explanation of Rashi, this Lashon Rishon of Rashi, is the explanation that backs off of that claim and says that's not true. There is no such distinction between Isho Mishum Chetzio and Isho Mishum Mamono in terms of whether you have to own the fire or not. That could be the other explanation of Rashi, that you can see the Achronim to see the discussion on that point. And the Gemara continues, the Mishnah said, Al Acharora Mishalim Mechulu is talking about a case where the dog takes the biscuit, and there's also a coal that the biscuit is on that's attached to the biscuit, and so therefore he damages the Charora, he damages the biscuit, but then he also lights up the entire stack of grain. And the Mishnah said again that the person is chayiv to pay full when it comes to the biscuit, and you have to pay only chatzi nezik when it comes to the stack of grain. And the Gemara says, man chayiv. The Gemara says, who is chayiv? Who's the one here that has to make this payment? Baal Kelev, it seems to be the owner of the dog that's responsible. But the Gemara says, v'lechayiv nami, Baal Gacheles, why don't we also say the owner of the coal? He didn't protect his coal properly, so he should be responsible. And the Gemara says, no, b'shashimer gachalto. The case is that he did protect his coal properly. The Gemara says, ike shashimer gachalto, but if the case is that he protected his coal properly, my boy Kelev Hassam. So how did the dog even get it? What happened over there? And the Gemara says, b'shachasar, the case is that it was enclosed, but the dog was able to dig under the fence, dig under the wall, and that's why the person who protected his coal, he's fine, he's not obligated to pay, but the owner of the dog is obligated. And the Gemara continues, Amar of Mori, Breder of Kahana, Rav Mori, the son of Rav Kahana, says, Zosomeres, this proves, Stam de Losos Chasuros Hein, Eitzel Kelev, that most doors we can assume that a dog is able to dig underneath, and therefore that's a responsibility on the owner of the dog to make sure that doesn't happen. And the Gemara continues, the Gemara says, well, where exactly did the dog eat this biscuit? If he ate it by some stack of grain that belonged to somebody else, don't we need what by Shane? It has to be that he consumes it in the field of that other person, of the Nizik. And here he's going to some other field. You shouldn't be responsible for Shane in that situation. And the Gemara says, lo, no, tzricha, the case is necessary. He ate it, the same stack of grain that was owned by the person who owned the biscuit, so he did eat it in the Chatzar Hanizik, and that's why we say again that the person who owns the dog is responsible. But the Gemara says, according to that, Tifshot to Pipara, so we should understand from that the mouth of the cow, the Gemara will go into a discussion of whether the mouth of the cow is considered to be the rishus of the mazik or not. And we will take a look at Rashi over here. Man chaye bal hakelev, who's the one that has to pay? It's the owner of the dog. Amasnis and Mahadi, we're going on the Mishnah. The Katani ala Godish Meshalim Chatzi Nezik, it says you pay on the stack of grain, you pay half the damage. Hachi Garsin and Vilachayev Nami bal hagachela, so also the owner of the coal should be responsible. To habein mar uvein mar mishum amono islu, as we said before, whether you're going like Rabbi Yochanan or whether you're going like Reish Lakish, the obligation of Eish is because it's his property that's causing damage. Hilkach Rabbi Yochanan damar le'el ala Godish Meshalim Chatzi Nezik the tzroro, saying therefore, for example, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says you pay for the stack of grain just Chatzi Nezik because it's like tzroros, it's like the case of the pebbles that are going from the animal. L'shalim balagachelas Chatzi acher, so the owner of the coal should pay the other half to hamamonohu because that's his property that's doing the damage. Reish Lakish damar ala Godish kulo have a potter, and according to Reish Lakish, who says that on the entire stack of grain is potter, l'shalim balagachelas kula, again the owner of the coal should actually pay everything because because right now we think that the coal belongs to one person and the charora and the gadish that belongs to another person, and so therefore again the person who owns the gachelas should be responsible to pay because it's no different than isho mishum mamono. And the Gemara then said b'shashimar gachalto, the case is the person who owned the gachelas, he was protecting it, shenoal dalsos beiso yafa v'ones, so he closed the doors of his house well, and therefore it's considered to be an ones. Zoso meres, and then the Gemara said this shows me the chayiv lebal kelev acharor nezek sholim, from the fact that the owner of the dog has to pay for the biscuit the full amount. Al molav shinoi who's shechasras hadelos. You see that it's not considered a shinoi. It's not a strange kind of damage that he dug under the door. To stam delosas chasura saying it's al kelev, because that's most doors the dog is able to dig under. Velotema meshunahu palgan is kameshalim. Don't say that that's strange behavior and he only has to pay half. Begadish dialm, and then the Gemara suggested maybe we're talking about a stack of grain that belongs to someone else. Amay meshalim acharor hashenu. So then if that's the case, so why are you paying? Why should he pay over there on the charora? That would be considered shein. Uva'inon stay achar the nizik v'leka, needs to be in the field of the nizik, but here it's by the stack of grain that belongs not to the nizik but from someone else, but to somebody else. Tifsho the kameshalim charora. Then the Gemara said, well, we should understand from that from the fact that he has to pay for the biscuit to piparaso shel mazik ochelas b'chatzar hanizik, that if you have the mouth of the cow of the mazik but you're in the chatzar hanizik, we should understand that is not considered as if it happened in the rishus of the mazik, as the Gemara will discuss. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Beis.